Okay, let's continue on in this tutorial with fleshing out our enemy class. So before I get into adding any more methods, I want to focus on this concept of attributes. Now, an attribute is any variable that we store inside of a class. Okay, so for our enemy class, let's imagine that we want to store some information about it. And I'd like to focus on a concept here about visibility. You've seen the keyword public a bunch of different times in these tutorials, and what I'd like to do now is focus on what that really is. So within a class, if anything is marked as public, then that means that things outside of the class can gain access to it. So if this doSomething function is marked as public, then that means somewhere else in my code, for example inside of main, I can access that method and I can make it invoke that doSomething function. If something is marked as private, then the item, whether it's an attribute as a variable or a method, is not able to be seen outside of the class. So I can use it within this class, and everywhere inside of this class can make use of it, but outside of, in other pieces of code like in main, you're not able to get to it. So for our attributes, we typically want to make these private, in that I want to manage these variables and not let anyone mess with them unless they're going through some method that I'm making public. So for example, let's imagine that the enemy has an attribute called hit points that defines how strong or how alive this thing is. I could also make its attack strength and make it private. So these two attributes are within the class, and only inside of the class, methods inside of this class can get to it. Let's do one more. And we'll make this an integer. And let's imagine that we're creating a two-dimensional game and the enemy is moving around. So I'm going to have two integers, position x and position y, and just to make sure that you realize that we can create attributes of any data type, it doesn't all have to be integers, let's create this enemy's name, okay, or unique ID. Okay, so I've created 5 attributes. They're all marked as private. I've got 4 integers and a string. Now, if I want to give access to anyone outside of this class, I'm going to need to create something that's public. And I want to create an accessor, for example, that might be able to allow you to get to these attributes. Let me make a quick change and create lowercase, changing these to lowercase h, a, and n. And what I'm going to do now is create a capitalized H hit point. Now remember, the capitalization matters. So I'm creating an accessor at this point so that if you ask me what is the hit points, let me make that a capital H like I should, then it'll take away that error because it was saying, hey, you'd already defined that. So this capital H hit point is going to tell me what is the health of the enemy, or I can call it health. And if you ask me what is the health, then I'm going to return the hit point value. Okay, so now I'm maintaining the privacy of this health information, this hit point value inside of the class, but I'm also creating a public accessor called health that will let the user know outside of the class in main, for example, how healthy the enemy is. If you want to know how strong the enemy is, I could create a public int strength or attack strength. I'm just going to call it strength here to reinforce this concept that it doesn't have to be the same name as the private attribute here. And so I've got these get keywords that allow me to return something that's private if you ask me to make use of this public accessor. Okay, and finally, let's create a public string. And we'll call it capital N, oops, capital N name. And if you ask me what is the name, then I'm going to return to me the lowercase name. Also, in addition to get, I've got set. So as you would imagine, I can assign a value into this. And I can say something to the effect of if value is not equal to. So if this value that you're trying to set the name to be is not equal to the empty string, then I'll set the lowercase name, which is our private attribute here, to be whatever value you're passing in. Okay? Otherwise, I'm not going to do anything. Okay, so the set operator is going to allow me to take in this value. This is a keyword value that's whatever the value that's coming in, and I can do some work on this to make sure, hey, make sure that the name actually is legitimate, as in it's not an empty name. Okay, so that's an example of how to define attributes, and as I said, you typically want to make them private, and then also how to make public accessors and also public modifiers using our get and our set syntax. In the next tutorial, we'll pick up and talk about constructors.